So far, it seems to work well. They've changed this year. I always used to use Google Hangouts. You used to be able to screen share and live stream to Google Hangouts, and they recently stopped that, presumably because people were live streaming things like Netflix and sharing their screen, I assume is why they stopped it. So they now make you go through some other tools. But yeah, so far, that tool seems to be pretty good. Okay, so I'm gonna open up my store. As I said, if you weren't here, you can pull down the project that I put on GitHub at the end of class last week. We'll keep working on it. If for any reason, if you miss class, then there's your solution. You go to GitHub and download the project. You'll have the updated code and you can follow along with the YouTube video. The links for those things, again, would be in weekly learning tools and resources. I think those are the first two links here. So here's the link to the class channel, and here's the link to GitHub where you can download repository. Rick, you had a question? No, you're good? Okay. Actually, one thing I will just point out, if you need to grab a copy, ever need to grab a copy of my code from GitHub, there's two ways you can do it. And one way I don't recommend, and I'll show you why. So here's our project, our COMP2084, fall 2019. Ryan named our store Control-Alt-PC for his big 1% bonus at the end of the semester. So if you need a copy of this code ever, you have a couple of options. One option it gives you, which I don't recommend, is to clone it. Now, you don't want to clone the project because if you clone it, it does download a copy. The problem is your copy is still tied to my GitHub repository. So you can't push changes to it because you don't have the rights to this repository. This one's owned by me. So instead, if you need a copy, what you want to do is click here and you want to download it as a zip file. So you need to download it and then extract it. That gives you a local copy, and that copy is not connected already to my repository. So that's the difference between download and clone. So if you want my code, you don't want to clone it. You only ever want to clone a repository that you have access, you have write access to. So here's our project as we left it last week. So if I want to launch this project and get it running in the browser, how would I do it? There's a few ways of doing it. What's the best way for us to do that? I guess I should actually open my project first. That'd probably be a good idea. So I'll click on shows up in my recent projects. Also under file, there's a recent projects, and it'll show you your most recent solution files. So here's how we left this off. How would we get this to actually run so we can see it in a browser? Yeah. So, and that's here under the debug menu. Yes. Thank you. So if I could choose start debugging, and that would work as well. But if I choose start debugging, my code window is locked because the debugger is active, so I can't actually make any changes. So most of the time, I'm going to want to go to debug, and I'm going to want to start without debugging. So Visual Studio will check for changes in my source code. It'll build our DLL, and it launches our site here on localhost using this randomly assigned port. Okay. If you get that, let's try this first. Okay. Here's the first thing to try. Let me just open up. So with mine, what the issue may be, remember when we created the project, I checked off the option to add my project to source control or create a GitHub repository, depending on which version. So one of the things that does is that creates a gitignore file for Visual Studio. The gitignore file excludes any project dependencies that our project uses. So when I push my code up to GitHub, the dependencies are missing. So when you download it, you don't have the dependencies. So to fix that, if you right-click the solution, you should have an option here that says Restore NuGet Packages. That will then download any of the dependencies that my project needs that didn't get included when I pushed up to GitHub. So again, in Solution Explorer, if you're working on your own project from last week, you don't need to do this. This is only if you downloaded my repository from GitHub. You right-click the solution, which is the very top item here in Solution Explorer, and you choose Restore the NuGet Packages. Once that's done, okay, all right, that's good. Once that's done, try this. Click on Build, and you can try Rebuild Solution. You'll notice there's two options here. Well, there's actually three. There's Build and Rebuild. Build just compiles a new version of our code. Rebuild actually deletes the old DLL and recreates it. So when you're having errors, Rebuild is usually your first option. So try Rebuild, try it again, and let me know what happens. There's a few other possible fixes, but Rebuild is always our first fix when it seems to get stuck. Okay. It's not supporting it, but you did install it last week, right? Are you using Visual Studio 2017 or 2019? Sorry? Okay. Let's go back for a second then. You may need to download a different version of... So Rick, I want you to go here. It's .net.microsoft.com/download. Here's what may have happened. And these instructions are for Rick or anyone else getting an error saying that .NET Core 2.2 is not supported. So there are, under .NET Core 2.2, which is right at the top of the page, there were two versions here. You notice there's the .NET Core SDK, and this, the one below, says compatible with Visual Studio 2017. So Rick, I'm wondering if what may have happened is last week when we installed this, I wonder if you installed this one, which will run in Visual Studio 2019, you may need this version instead. I did have students in my Friday class with the exact same problem as you. They reinstalled this one here. You probably will also have to restart Visual Studio. So you'll have to run that installer. It'll probably say you have to close Visual Studio. So try that. So here was our site as we left it. We have a privacy page that Visual Studio auto-generated. And then last week we built this little about page. So we had to do three things in order to make this about page work. It wasn't here. Visual Studio only gave us home and privacy. What was one thing we had to do last week in order to enable this? Even was one thing. Sorry? Right, so we created in our home controller, we created a method called about. So the home controller was automatically generated, but we added an about method. So that was one thing we did. What else did we do to make that link and that page show up? Yep, so we then created, under views and home, we created a view called about, where we put on a heading and just some static content. Where's the rest of the HTML in this? Notice, like, where's the header, where's the footer, where's the nav bar? Because none of that stuff is here. Blair? Right. We're linking to our layout file. So inside of shared and layout, this page is serving as the template so that we get a fully formed responsive page. So most of that design and layout comes from this file, from view, shared, and layout. So those were two of the things we did. We built the method in the controller. We built a view with the same name, and the name is important because we didn't actually specify, we never specified what view to load. Visual Studio will automatically look for a view called about if our method is called about. And then how did we get this link here? Because this wasn't here when we set up our project, all right? Right, so if the layout has our template includes our nav bar because it's a shared item. So inside of our layout, we created this new link. So it looks, at the beginning, it looks mostly like a standard HTML link with a couple of Bootstrap classes on it. But then instead of an href property, we actually set up these ASP properties where we indicate which controller are we calling, and inside of the controller, which method do we want to load. Now at runtime, we won't see these attributes. We never actually looked at this. So this gets translated into a standard HTML link at runtime. So if we wanted to, we could have used this code instead. We could have just put in a plain HTML link if we wanted to. And it would be correct, but Visual Studio kind of prefers this syntax where we're being a little more intentional about the fact that we're using the MVC pattern. We're not just linking from one page to another. Our link is calling a method inside of a controller. And that's kind of the structure and pattern of our site. All right. Any questions about any of this so far? We haven't changed anything. Just kind of going over what we did last week. We'll do some more of this today. We'll make it a little more advanced. Is yours loading? Okay, excellent. Okay, let's do a couple of other things with this. One thing we want to do is maybe we'll find a really quick and dirty way to not have our site just look like the Visual Studio template. So let's go and grab a free Bootstrap 4 theme. And we can add that in to our site. Some of you may have seen this site before. Just a quick way to add to build on top of the Bootstrap 4 template that already comes with Visual Studio. For some of you, it would be much easier to customize this site yourself. Inside of the www root folder, we've got CSS, and we have a default style sheet. And probably some of you guys could slice and dice this one really quickly and make the site look better. I don't have those skills. I could do it, it would take me forever. This isn't a CSS class, so rather than me spending the time playing around with the CSS, which you're more than free to do, I'm just gonna go to Bootswatch. So I'm just gonna go and grab one of these. So maybe I'll choose this one. You can pick any theme you like. So if I click under this Flatly theme, I've got the minified as well as the full version. I'm going to download the unminified. Actually, I'll download both and I'll show you where they go. So first I'll right-click the minified Bootstrap and I'll choose Save As. And here's where they go. Inside of www root, we have a CSS and a JS folder, but these are those are designed for our own CSS and our own JavaScript. We also have a library file. So this means if we're downloading any third-party CSS, JavaScript files inside of here, so this is where we find the default Bootstrap. Again, you can see the path in the address bar at the top. So inside the project, www root, library, and Bootstrap, and then in the distribution folder and CSS. I'll leave that open for a minute. You can see the path. This is where the default Bootstrap files are. So I want to overwrite both the minified and the unminified versions. That will basically replace the default Bootstrap with the theme. So I'll save the minified version here. And then I'll do the exact same thing with the unminified. I'll just say save and replace. And I'll repeat that process with the unminified version. You don't have to do this. If you don't care at all, you're free to ignore this step. So I'm going to save the bootstrap.css and it'll just open. Windows will take me back to the same directory. And I'll just replace this file too. www.root library bootstrap dist css. And yeah, I'll replace it. So if I refresh now, well, my theme doesn't look too different. At least I've got some different colors showing up. And I think a different font. I could play around with that more later. Now there's one other thing I need to do once I've downloaded those, and that's in my layout file. So if I look at the, you'll notice that here's our CSS section, starting from line 8 to line 18. So it links to our custom style sheet. It links, it says, inside, if this is a development environment, use the unminified Bootstrap. So that way, if we want to make changes, it's a lot easier to change the unminified version that we can actually read. But when we're in production, it's actually using the Bootstrap CDN, which would mean if we deployed this to a server, our theme is going to be wiped out if we leave this code here. So I'm going to just highlight all of that and comment it out. And I'll just add in a link to the minified version we downloaded. Which is this long, torturous path of library, Bootstrap, dist, CSS. And there's our minified version. The path is actually right here. It has it as a fallback. So it says, if you can't find the CDN version, use the fallback. I'm just going to use my local one. It is Control K. You can also turn this little toolbar on. I find it invaluable. I use it. This, I think, is the debug toolbar. Let me check. If I go to View and Toolbars, it's either the text editor or the HTML. Let me see. No, it's not that. I think if you go to View and Toolbars, yep. Thank you, Ryan. So you have to do both Control K. I assumed one was comment and the other was uncomment. I guess not. So it's Control K first and then Control C. Or if you can figure out how to turn on these little icons, this is comment and this is uncomment, where you can just highlight a block. I find those buttons incredibly useful. They save a lot of time. So you'll notice the server side comment You can also manually put in these Dustin, you can also manually put in the opening and closing server-side comment tag. So this is the only server-side tag that has a closing tag, is when we're doing a comment block. So it'll be @ star to open and star @ to close. The rest of our server-side code has no closing tag, like here. Again, this is totally optional. You may not care. You may not be bothered to change the CSS, and if so, that's fine. It's almost time for us to take a break. One other quick thing I want to do. I'm going to open up my home page. And I'm maybe just going to change some of the description here. So what I want to do is put in something descriptive on the home page, and then I want to create a README file for our GitHub repository so that if you ever are showing this application potentially in a co-op interview, there's a description of what this actually is, rather than the text that Microsoft gives us. So we should have that description on the homepage of our site, as well as we should have that description in the README file in case we want to say to an employer, hey, here's our site, here's my repository, you can go and see the work. The README file should describe what that project is. So I'll put in a little description here. I'm going to put a link to my GitHub repository as well. You can put a link to your repository. You can say whatever you like here. You don't have to copy what I've. I'll maybe put in the title. I just want to put something descriptive here. If anybody, I want to show anybody this site, they know why we built it, what technologies were being used. And then my homepage should look. So now I also want to make a small README file that contains kind of the same description. I'll just copy that one line paragraph. And later on, when we publish our website to Microsoft Azure, we can put a link in the README file there as well. So someone viewing the code knows, here's how I get to the site. So I'm going to create a small README file and then add this to GitHub. And then we'll take a break. So what I'm going to do to create my README file, I'm going to, at the very top of my Solution Explorer, I'm going to right-click my solution, and I'm going to add a new item. And all I want is a text file. I'm going to give a specific name, which is readme.md. Anybody know what the MD extension stands for? Yeah, for Markdown. So we can use HTML. We can also use plain text in here. And this is the standard file name that GitHub repositories use for their documentation. Normally, when we go to GitHub and look at a code repository, there's a README file that describes what's in that repository. So I'll create a README. I'm just going to copy my description. Just going to copy this. What the project is and what tools we used. I'm just going to throw that into the README file. So I'll just copy that one line. Later on, we might add other things in here. And then I just want to add my changes to GitHub. So you'll notice here's what my repository looks like right now. We just see the list of files. When I upload the README, the description is automatically going to show up down below my list of files. So I'm just going to use my Team Explorer, and I'll add my changes, added theme, and README. And then I'll click commit and push, and this will upload our CSS changes, our homepage description, and that new README file. I'll just say yes, I want to save the changes. It says it pushed my stuff to GitHub. And now when I refresh, the README file is going to automatically show up here. So now it's here. So anybody who comes here can now see what this project is and what I'm doing. So we may add some other things to the README file later on. We should have one of these in all of our projects. I'll show you another quick example of a README. So again, you get the idea of how this might be used in a more practical sense. So this is a student project. So in the README, it describes, so this is a mobile project. The README is used to describe how to get the project to run locally. If we add a new developer to the team, it says clone the repository so you get a copy. Here's what you need to install, and here's how you can run the project. So the README files are typically used to document our projects in some way. We don't have a lot of instructions here, just a basic description. Well, we want this at minimum. So this will be part of what you'll have to do in your assignments as well. There'll be some marks for creating a README file that describes what you're doing in the project. All I did was just a heading and a paragraph tag. You can put anything you want in here. It doesn't really matter. I just like to put a description. I mean, we know that employers often ask to see students' GitHub repositories. They want to see your code and see your work. So this is kind of expected professional practice when we publish a project to GitHub. There's a README file that describes what that project does. So think about this, you're writing this for an employer who might be looking at your work on GitHub someday. That's the point of this. All right, it's 5 to 9. I'm going to stop my stream. So everything we've done so far today is on GitHub now. We'll take a pause and we'll come back in about 10 minutes. Okay.